I'm very proud to introduce our next speaker, who is no stranger to the abundance movement. Senator Scott Wiener has represented District 11 in the California State Senate since 2016, advocating for housing affordability, public transit, healthcare access, climate action, criminal justice reform, and LGBTQ+ rights. He has authored 87 bills signed into law, including SB 35 and SB 423 to streamline housing development, SB 855 to expand mental health coverage, and SB 822 to enact the nation's strongest net neutrality protections. As chair of the Senate Budget Committee and other key roles, he has led efforts on housing, transportation, and public safety reforms. Previously, he served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, passing groundbreaking policies on paid parental leave, housing, and transit. Before public office, he practiced law and held leadership roles in LGBTQ+ advocacy. A New Jersey native, he earned degrees from Duke and Harvard and was a Fulbright scholar in Chile. He has lived in San Francisco's Castro neighborhood since 1997. Please welcome Senator Scott Wiener.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today and for doing this. This is, I'll be honest, the abundance movement is it's very, very exciting. And it sort of started with YIMBYism to say, hey, we don't have enough housing. Why can't we have more housing? Why is it so hard to build more housing? But then it grew from there. And I think there's an increasing realization in not just California, but in the US, that out of fear of the potential of something bad happening, we're gonna make it really hard to do anything, including the good things. And that has left us with extreme artificial scarcity. And that has had so many profoundly harmful consequences for society. And as with so many problems that we inflict on ourselves, because human beings have that tendency, we inflict problems on ourselves that don't need to be there, it started from a place of reacting to something bad that was happening. We know that, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were good things happening, but there were some bad things happening. And government was doing things like, bulldozing entire neighborhoods to put freeways there, and doing some very problematic things. And so there was a revolt against that to say we need more guardrails and public process and public participation and checks so that government doesn't do things like bulldoze my entire neighborhood or push the bulk of the black community out of San Francisco, and go on and on with examples around the country. And that is a noble, or put freeways through Golden Gate Park, which was the plan in San Francisco. They were going to build a freeway through the middle of Golden Gate Park. And those are incredibly important and noble goals to stop bad things from happening. But as is so often the case, it swung way in the other direction. And instead of saying, let's just put some guardrails in place so bad things don't happen, it became an entire generation brought up with the notion that building anything is suspect. That we should always start from a place that if you're building anything, we should be suspicious of that unless you can prove to us that it's a good thing. And so we set up all sorts of constraints on building anything. On housing, we know what happened. We had downzoning in San Francisco, in LA, Los Angeles, literally deleted 1/2 of its zoned housing capacity in the 1980s. San Francisco, massive downzoning. Again, reaction, there was and I'm bringing up San Francisco, it's where I'm from, but the Fontana Towers up in Pacific Heights, it was like this controversial apartment building that was built in the 60s. And so because of the Fontana Towers, no one's allowed to have housing, apparently. That was the the thinking. Like, you built this one thing that we think is bad. When I look at the Fontana Towers, I think it's fine. It's like a whole bunch of people live there, but there was a reaction to it, and then all of a sudden we have to downzone everything and make it really expensive to live in San Francisco. And this happened all across many parts of the country. We did things like set up incredibly elaborate permit processes to build anything. We made permits discretionary, so every permit became a political football. Instead of just saying, here are the rules you have to follow, and if you check the boxes, you get your permit, we said, no, if you check the boxes, that just means you get to go into the political mosh pit and fight for the thing that we already authorized to happen. Now, and whoever can scream the loudest and turn out the most people at a city council meeting or planning commission meeting gets to decide. And it happened with housing. It happened with transportation projects. It happens with clean energy. Happens with childcare centers, with homeless shelters. List goes on and on. All the things that I think the vast majority of people, if you ask them, would say these are good things for society. More housing is good. More clean energy is good. More public transportation is good. More childcare centers is good. Being able to have homeless shelters, that's good. But when it comes time to actually building it, we start from the place of skepticism. And then on top of all of it, California passed a law called the California Environmental Quality Act. And the media constantly describes it as an environmental law. It is not an environmental law. We should remove the word environment from that law because it is not an environmental law. Yes, it touches on some environmental issues, but it is a public process. It's a process law. And yes, it can be used to stop a project that's going to put toxics in the soil, even though, frankly, we have toxics standards. We have laws that say this is what you have to do around toxics. Yes, it can be used to maybe slow down a dam or something that could be harmful in a community, but it also can be used to stop someone from putting new windows in their homes that are more energy efficient. It can be used to prevent someone, until recently, from turning their garage into an accessory dwelling unit. It can be used to stop a park renovation. We had that happen in San Francisco. It can be used to try to stop a library from being rebuilt, and on and on and on. So I like to describe CEQA as the law that swallowed California, because it truly has. And so where has this left us? It's left us with these self-inflicted massive shortages. We are short millions of homes. I was so happy that Kamala Harris was talking about housing as a shortage in her campaign. That was a profoundly important transition for a presidential nominee to describe it. Yes, it's an affordability crisis, but that's very nebulous what that means. It's a housing shortage, and she said that. Her number was too low, though, because she was talking about it. Because in California alone, we are short millions of homes, and that's why people can't afford to live here. It's why we're pushing out middle-class, working-class families. There's always this narrative that rich people are leaving California. That's not who's leaving. It's low-income and working-class people who are being pushed out. It's young people who are being pushed out. We have generated a situation where Texas generates more clean energy than California. Texas is smaller than California, and Texas doesn't believe in climate change. And yet Texas generates more clean energy than California. And there are solar companies, sometimes utility scale solar companies, that try to open in California, like in Kern County, I'm aware, and they end up instead packing up and opening in Texas because the permitting and because PG&E is a disaster, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, everything is set up to prevent things from happening, either intentionally or via sheer incompetence in the case of PG&E. And so we don't have enough childcare centers. And I could go on and on and on with these self-induced shortages that are the result of policy constructed to say, when it comes to building anything, you are guilty until proven innocent. And that has to change, and that's what abundance is about. It's about saying, what are the good things that we want? And let's make it easier and faster to build those good things. We don't want more oil drilling, so let's not make it easier and faster to build more oil drilling capacity in California. But we do want more housing, and we want them to be hopefully a little bit less in the wildfire areas, more in the non-wildfire areas. So instead of just talking about where we don't want to build housing, which is always how it works, we don't want to build it in the wildfire zone. We don't want to build it by the coast. We don't want to build it near a freeway. We don't want to build, everyone's always talking, we have to lock down this geography, that geography, and putting aside the fact that sometimes those arguments are very extreme. Like, how about we talk about where we do want to build housing? And if we're going to say we're not going to build so much in some areas, that means we have to build more in those areas that we do want to build in, more densely. That's why we're trying this year to, once again, to say let's build more densely around high quality public transportation. The idea that that is a controversial idea shows how much brain rot there is when it comes to government in the state of California, that it would be controversial to say we should have dense housing near rail stations and rapid bus stations. That brain rot is the only way to describe that. And yet that's where we are in this debate. We know that in terms of transportation, we have horrible congestion problems in California. And even though whenever you're stuck in traffic, part of me is like, okay, at least people are like moving around, like coming out of the pandemic, like traffic was a sign that life was returning and economic activity returning. But the idea that there is that much traffic and that people often don't have options to take transit is a problem. And yet you look at high-speed rail, which it's the PR debate about that is so weird. We do not have a true statewide rail system in California, and it takes twice as long to take a train from the Bay Area to LA as it does to drive, and it's an indictment of California that we don't have that, and yet we tie ourselves up in knots in terms of getting it done. We've empowered every local government, every utility, every telecom to like stall that project. If there's a Comcast wire that needs to be buried so that they can build a little bridge over a little ravine, they have to just stop until Comcast gets around to saying, yeah, you can bury that wire. We have a bill to put an end to that, put a shot clock on all of those permits. And so that's been a black eye for California. And so let's just get it done. Let's make it easier to build rail, to build bus-only lanes, to do all the things that we know will help people get around more efficiently and reduce traffic congestion. Mayor Lurie in San Francisco has committed to expanding shelter capacity in the city because we don't have enough shelter. And he's already running into some resistance on that because we empower people, the vetocracy, we empower people to say no, and everyone has a right to an opinion about what happens in their neighborhood. I've lived in my neighborhood for 28 years. I love my neighborhood. I have a right, everyone has a right to an opinion about what happens in their neighborhood, to express that opinion, to have their elected representatives take that into account. But that is very different than giving everyone a veto, right? That you have a beginning, middle, and end of the process, and then it's over and a decision is made. And if you disagree with the decision, that's your right, and there's going to be an election in the future. But the idea that we just allow often unrepresentative groups of people to bog down decisions that are going to make life better overall, understanding that anything you build is going to have positive and negative impacts on some people's lives, but we're a community and we need to get that done. So we've seen in the legislature a real shift in thinking. And although a lot of my colleagues may not have ever heard of the term abundance in this context. More and more of them are, which is great, but they know what it means. And so we compare now to 2017 or 2016 when I was first elected to the Senate. I have so many more colleagues who on housing just intuitively get it. And now we're finally seeing some really aggressive permitting reform that's going to happen this year. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, who convened the Select Committee, did some amazing hearings. And we're seeing housing, transportation, energy, I think some really aggressive work that's going to happen this year, and we need to make sure that that gets done. It requires a lot of stakeholder work. There's a lot of complicated politics on every level when it comes to making it easier to build things, whether it's environmentalists or labor, or local government, and so on and so forth. And we have really worked hard to try to navigate that. I do want to just say, and I do this every opportunity I get, I'm an ardent environmentalist. I get really high scores from Sierra Club and California Enviro voters and so on and so forth. It's something I deeply believe in. The environmental movement needs to start supporting making it easier to build things that will reduce climate change. And that means infill housing, it means transit, it means clean energy. And when you see environmental organizations taking a tunnel visioned approach that ignores climate change, and that's what we see at times, environmental organizations that will either be neutral on or even oppose bills to make it easier to build sustainable housing, that is not okay. And the environmental movement needs to be a pro-building good things that fight climate change movement. That is so incredibly important. And so we've been able to make some real progress in recent years. I'm hoping that this year will be a big year. I'm so happy about all the organizing that's happened in the abundance world and in my neck of the woods with the Abundance Network. And it's just, Ezra Klein's book that's coming out, and Why Nothing Works, which is an amazing book if you haven't read it. We have all these, we're finally having this conversation, and it's very exciting. And so thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for having me today.